G'day everyone, Matt from Marker66 here again, and today we're going to be doing a video on some chicken, and we're specifically going to be looking at brining. Now we're going to be doing some Waitoa chicken drumsticks that we've got down here, and Waitoa chicken are really great. They're free range, they're local to us, and they're great tasting chicken, so that's why we're using that today. But specifically we're going to talk about brining, and it's something that I'm quite interested in, and it's a little bit barbecue geeky. But brining was something that I did for a long time without, I think, really understanding what I was doing. I was just doing it based on the fact that that's what we were supposed to do with chicken. So when I started delving it into a bit more and understanding it a bit better, I found that my brining was a lot more effective. Okay, I think the first thing we need to think about is what we're trying to achieve with our brine. And really, unlike, say, something like a marinade or a rub or even some injections, what we're trying to achieve is textural, not so much flavour. So fundamentally, a brine is just salt and water. So while yes, salt is a flavour amplifier and may have some secondary impact on your flavour, this is a texture-based process. So what meat can we brine? Now, you can brine pork, but for me personally, I like to stick to chicken just for my brining. And the reason that chicken lends itself better to brining is because the pores of the meat are small enough that it's going to allow that salt to penetrate all the way through to the centre. Whereas something like beef, it doesn't quite work that way. The fibres of the meat are different, and so that lends itself more to injecting rather than brining. Okay, we're going to go through a very basic homemade brine. And the first thing we're going to put in is our functional ingredient, which is salt. We're putting in 225 grams of salt, and the reason I'm using weight over volume is so that you can use any type of salt you like, whether you want to use your rock salt, kosher salt, table salt, whatever you've got available to you. Now I'm also putting 100 grams of soft brown sugar. Now sugars, while it does dissolve, at a molecular level, it doesn't dissolve down enough to really penetrate right to the centre of your chicken. But what it will do is it's going to penetrate around the edge, maybe 3, 4, 5 mil. And when you're cooking something like a chicken drumstick or a chicken thigh, which are reasonably thin cuts, that sugar rather, is going to penetrate enough to give you a little bit of a sweet flavour around the outside there. Right, the last ingredient that I'm going to put in, other than my water, is some peppercorns. So I've got half a tablespoon here. Now, if you choose to do so, you can put in some other ingredients. A couple of things to keep in mind. The first thing is if you're putting in things like spices, a lot of them aren't actually water soluble, so they're not going to dissolve in water. They're fat soluble. So they're better suited to something like a dry rub. When the fat on the surface of your meat starts to render down, that's going to dissolve those. Now, if you are going to put some aromatics in, so something like a bay leaf, or you might want to put a bit of garlic or something in there, then you can do that. Those are a bit more water soluble, and you are going to get a bit of flavour from it there. But again, it's a bit like the sugar. It's not going to penetrate as deeply as the salt, but it is going to give you a bit of surface flavour. The last thing I'm going to add is some water, and I'm going to put 16 cups. And it seems like quite a big volume, but the reason we want to put that much in is because we don't want it too salty. If we went 50-50 salt and water, it's just too much. So we want to keep that salinity level reasonably low. Now, one thing I do recommend is using bottled water. So yes, bottled water still has some hard minerals and is chlorinated a little bit, but you're just getting that consistency of flavour. Sometimes your tap water can be a little bit off where you can taste some of the minerals in it. So I just find that bottled water's probably been through some sort of filtration, which is a bit better than your tap water. So whenever I'm making injections or brine, I'm making sure that I always use bottled water. Okay, now we've got all these ingredients, and I'm just going to give it a bit of a stir, and then I'm going to let it sit here just for a little bit because I want that salt and sugar to really dissolve into the water. So I want to give it some time to do that. And while that is doing that, I will just mention that there are a number of store-bought chicken brines out on the market there. There's like the Oak Ridge ones we've got here. I know that Cosmos Q and Meat Church both also do a store-bought chicken brine. There's nothing wrong with using these. In fact, you find a lot of competition teams will use these over your homemade. And the reason for that is that what you're buying here is consistency. You know that every time you buy this pack, you're getting the same brine every time. So there's no variants that are coming into play that you might introduce by making your own homemade. But certainly at home, there's nothing wrong with your homemade. That'll be the way to go. Okay, the sugar and salt in our brine is fully dissolved now, which is looking really good. What I've done is I've bagged up the chicken. So if you've got a backpacker, you can use backpack bags. I'm just using the Glad Ziplocs. And I've actually double bagged it, and I've just set them in a foil tray, and that's just in case there's any leakage. We just want to contain that. So the amount of brine we're going to use is going to be determined by the weight of the meat. So we're looking at 2 to 3 times the weight of the meat in brine. So I'll put these on the scales. And I'm just going to make the assumption that these bags weigh nothing, and we're looking at 1.5 kilos of chicken in here, which means if I go somewhere between 2 and 3, so 2.5 times the weight of the chicken in brine, we're looking at 3.75 kilos of brine. And I'm going to just pop these on the scale and pour the brine in till I'm as close as I can get to that value. Right, this can be a bit tricky, so if you've got a second person to hold the bag, it might be handy, but we'll see how we go. All right, there we go. So you can see there's quite a lot of brine there. 1.5 kilos is quite a lot of meat to be cooking in one go. If you were doing less, obviously your volume of brine would be less. So I'm going to squeeze as much air out of that as I can. Seal both those bags up. Now you can brine with the skin on, it's no problem. So we've covered off the strength, the salinity of our brine, so how much water versus how much salt, and we've also talked about the volume of brine compared to how much chicken we're cooking. So the last thing really to cover off is how long we're going to brine for. Now, there's no real exact science to this. It depends a little bit on the thickness of the meat that you're brining. So if I was doing a whole chicken or a whole turkey, I might do it for a much longer period of time. But for something like a chicken drumstick like this or a chicken thigh, I'm not looking at that long a time at all, really. At home, I'm going to be going for about an hour. But that might be something fun for you to play around with. Have a try at 1 hour, 2 hours, and 3 hours, and just see what sort of results you get and what works for you. But for something like this, I'm going to brine for 1 hour. I know from experience that you can over brine, and that is something to be cautious of. So I would steer clear of the overnight brines for something like this. So we've had them in the brine for 1 hour now. I've just taken them out and laid them out on a paper towel just to mop up some of that excess liquid as it comes out. And so that's pretty much the brining side out of the way. And now we're going to move into the fun part and get them ready to cook.